Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Darsh.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare. As a physician, you routinely check your patient's health. But when was the last time you checked the financial health of your practice? You could be needlessly losing money right now. Stop bleeding money. Get actionable insights about your group's financial performance with a free, no-strings-attached assessment from CareCloud, a leader in medical billing solutions, electronic health records, and more. CareCloud has over 20 years' experience helping large and small providers boost profitability and has helped thousands of practices optimize their financial operations. Request your free revenue cycle assessment and learn more about your group's performance by visiting drpodcastnetwork.com/CareCloud. That's drpodcastnetwork.com/CareCloud. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Lessons Learned here on Medicine Redefined with Altamash and I. In this episode, we will be covering the previous three, which are with 1, Ryan Inman, 2, Dr. Ni-Cheng, Liang, and then 3, Roudy, Nassif. So let's start with Ryan Altamash. I know you are pretty familiar with his work. I think you enrolled in his course, if that's correct. So I'll let you kind of take away the first word here.
Yeah, I did the fellowship, which was super awesome. Highly recommend that for anybody who is interested in doing it a little bit themselves and just learning and more about finances. But this one was a super important topic, I believe. You know, I'm very much interested in personal finance, and I'm actually passionate about it, and was lucky. I shared my story that I learned about disability insurance because a couple of insurance agents came to me and tried to sell that to me. And this was actually right after maybe, that last month in fourth year when you're kind of just in limbo, waiting out, maybe sometimes end of April, May, before you start intern year. And I just kind of dove so deep into the rabbit hole, started with disability insurance and this and that, started learning about PSLF and finances. And I kind of just got addicted to it. And I mean, I consider myself fortunate in that regard because there are so many opportunities for us to mess up, man, along the ride. I mean, if you look at the lowest paying specialties, I'll pick on pediatricians because, I can. I mean, even they're going to make a few $1 million, right? If they practice for an average lifespan of a physician, 20 years or so. And so that's a lot of money. And if they're smart about it and they take care of their finances the way a lot of the big ticket items that we talked about, then you don't have to be broke when you're 55, 65 years out and still have to continue to need to work because you have loans and this kind of stuff. So I think it's super important. Hopefully people got some tidbits and just what to avoid and what not to avoid. And we'll get into some of the specifics of work. But can't emphasize it enough. And that's why we wanted to start off. Hopefully a couple interns, I'm sure they didn't have any time to listen to any podcasts nowadays, but when they do, if they do, they can get some valuable lessons from this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when we first linked up, right, kind of doing this podcast and I was starting intern year, you were probably one of the, few people who influenced me to get into kind of personal finance and just, straighten things out, especially with disability insurance, right? And kind of went through you to learn about those things. And I got it. And it's one of those things Ryan talks about in the podcast saying, there's no such thing as never too late. And there's also no such thing as never too early, right? It's the time is now to kind of do those things because you just never know what's going to happen down the line. And he recalls these emails that he gets from people saying, now my wife has MS and I'm stuck. And I know you told me this and I should have done it when you told me. But again, now I'm stuck. What do I do? Right. And that kind of breaks his heart. So it was just super cool to connect with him. I know a lot of people talk about the white coat investor. I forget, there's another one out there that I can't recall.
Physician on Fire.
And is there something with, I can't think of it. There's another like small book that people talk about, but
there's lots of good. There's Passive Income ND. There's lots of cool people doing this kind of stuff about personal finance, but yeah.
Right. But at least Ryan having a podcast too, right, called Financial Residency, for those of y'all that want to check it out. It goes into various topics that are super interesting, right? Things that us in medicine don't learn throughout med school, don't learn as a pre-med, and maybe honestly a bunch of us don't have interest in it. I remember my dad telling me, "Why do you want to become a doctor? You should go into business or something," right? He's like, all of us, the brown people, go into into science." And I was like, you know what? It's what I'm good at. I like it. I don't like business. I don't like dealing with money and these things. But I look back and I'm like, man, I probably should have learned some of that stuff, to where I am now. But hey, now is the time.
Right. And how important is it to understand the business of medicine? Because what we talked about is, we do spend a lot of time behind the computer documenting, making sure our notes are good from the clinical side of things, but also from the billing side of things. I am doing basically 90% of my billing now in this new role.
Yeah.
And it is very important to understand. And so the business of medicine is just as important. And that's going to also determine what kind of clinical care you're going to be able to provide for a patient. So I think that's really important to understand. But yeah, like you said, there's really no exposure, and we think there's no time to fit that in. But Ryan would argue, and I might agree with him, that it's just as important. And another thing that he mentioned is that we start so far, behind in the game, right?
Yeah.
If you think back to when we graduated, most people graduate undergrad at like, I don't know, 21, 22, somewhere in that range. And,
sure.
And our friends at that time who are going to business school, who are going to start off their, maybe they're not going for further training like we are for doctor training. They have, depending on how long of residency and fellowship we end up doing, they have anywhere from a 10 to a 12-year head start.
Wow.
Where they're accumulating wealth, they're building wealth. And not only are we not doing that, we're also digging a hole further down because we're taking on debt.
Absolutely.
And you brought up this concept of disability insurance, and I really like that. And if any of my co-residents are listening, they're probably cracking up right now because I've been beating this disability insurance drum for anybody I talk to. I really like the analogy that he uses, right? He talks about that basically it's this business, right? We take on this business that's in our head, right? Here in this country, if you start a business, you need to have some type of insurance to protect it. You buy a car, you can't drive without insurance. You buy a home, you can't. You got to have home insurance, got to have rental insurance. So it's almost illegal to have these big assets without insurance. Yet for us physicians, us young physicians, what's our greatest asset? It's our future income, right?
Yeah.
You and I have talked about this before.
Right.
And there's nobody out there saying you must protect it, right? Then that's wild. And man, I've and you're gonna, now that you're more in PM&R, you're gonna see these stories every single day where people are gonna be in the outpatient clinic, whether it's gonna be spinal cord or brain injury or stroke or whatever, and yeah, now they can't work. And MS, we see a lot of MS too, man, right? And for those of you who don't know, it's multiple sclerosis. It's technically a central nervous system disorder, so it can affects the brain and spinal cord. And so it's the asset that needs to be protected, and the return on the asset can vary. If you're a pediatrician, it's not as great. If you're an orthopedic surgeon, it's fantastic, right? And so it needs to be protected somehow, one way or another. So that is, I think, big ticket item number one. Actually, that's big ticket item number two. Big ticket item number one was, do you remember? Let's see.
I would say like savings, right? I mean, kind of.
Yeah. I think I was thinking more the way he talked about don't be an ostrich, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of just education awareness, which is kind of what we're talking about today.
Right.
Which, I mean, I can't recommend his podcast enough. He's got an awesome book, and it's not just him. I mean, he's doing the good work. But Jim Dolly from White Coat Investor, you talked about Physician on Fire. I forget what his name is. Passive Income MD. There's a lot of people who are doing a thing. The other thing is, like as he mentioned, is us physicians and healthcare providers in general, we've got a big target on our back for people in the financial industry, and they're not all bad people, but like you said, it's because we don't understand the finances, one, and two, a lot of people don't care for it. They're like, you know what, I don't really have time for this. And sometimes, they're just getting taken advantage of.
Yeah, exactly. And, to bring back your point about how our colleagues and our friends make, 10 years worth of money while we're suffering in debt and medical school and knowledge. Imagine once we do make that, the big bucks, right? What's our mindset? A lot of people just say, hey, now I can finally live, right? I can get that car I wanted to, that mansion I was thinking of. I want to catch up to these people, right? And you're just digging yourself a bigger hole. So I know Brian talks a lot about being smart, saving, right? He talks about how his average client spends about $2,000 a week or a month, I think a month, on Amazon.
That's wild.
Yeah, which is wild. I actually, after that episode, kind of went back to my Amazon. I was like, okay, thankfully I'm not there. I'm
I was
definitely
just
a lot
picking
more
up my phone
cautious.
to
But
check where.
yeah, that's a lot of money, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, it's so true, and I think it's just a great episode to kind of hopefully get people out of their comfort zone, right? If finances and talking about it makes you kind of want to crawl up and not talk about it, I think this is a good episode to kind of get you out of your shadows and start to learn about the things that will matter.
Yeah, I'm really glad you used that word behavior. He spent a lot of time talking about our relationship with money, and I think the word that he used is kind of lifestyle inflation, right? We delay this gratification for such a long time, and the moment you graduate, the moment you get that big attending check, you're like, now I want the car, I want this and that, and those are all nice things. And I think us, our colleagues, I mean, we all deserve them. We worked hard to get them, but then that debt is still there. And again, it's that hole that we talked about where compound interest is very powerful, and that's 10 years of compound interest that we haven't had the opportunity to take advantage of. What I really like that he talks about is give yourself at 50% of a raise, which again, he mentioned any other industry, that would be insane. And so for those of you who don't know this concept that Ryan routinely talks about, I'm really a big fan of, it's, if you as a resident, let's just say for simplicity, make $50,000 a year, the moment you graduate from training, you spend 75,000 that year. I mean, that is amazing.
Yeah.
Increase, right? Whatever else that you because typically for those people who don't know, it's like in residency, you make let's just say you're making $50,000 every single year. There's an incremental increase, but all of a sudden you have a 4x increase. You go from 50,000 to 200,000, 250,000. Like, what the heck are you going to do with that money?
Right.
And so he recommends give yourself a 50% raise, go to 75, spend that money and put it everywhere else in kind of, again, wealth accumulation, right? Whether that's savings, whether it's paying down debt, whatever it might be. I really like that because I think that we always talk about sustainability. I mean, there's this concept out there about living like a resident for 5 years. Actually, Jim Daly talks about that. And I think a lot of people can do that. It is a good approach. For those who are really, really frugal, they talk about that. And then you have the financial independence, retire early movement. That's awesome. But is it sustainable? It always comes back to that, right? And not only that, like, what's your quality of life going to be? Like, if you've delayed this gratification and your mental health is suffering for 8 years and now you want to kick the can down another 4 years, like, is that really worth it? Like, I don't know. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. I like that concept. Yeah. Increase by 50%. I mean, and like you said, any other industry you think of, that's wild, right? You don't hear about that in any other industry. So treat yourself, of course, but don't go full blown.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm trying to think if there were any other actionable items that people can take away. I mean, he had a lot of different gems. Obviously, mistakes not to make is I think the biggest thing would be is take some, you have to invest in our own education. And to your point, what we talk about, at least in our fellowship or really our conversations offline have been that, if you're whether or not you're in a 2-physician household or if you have a significant other that you're sharing finances with or not, there has to be one person in the house who's the CFO, right? And, if you're a physician and this is not an area of interest and this turns you off and the thought of personal finance or finances, you just want to cry, then you better hope that somebody in your family is who's looking out for you in your best interest is going to have that relationship. And so for me, like, honestly, in my personal thing, I'm very much about the investing insurance, looking at it from the global picture. And my, excuse me, my wife, she loves the budgeting side of it, and I don't on day to day, right? And so we kind of split the load, and it also allows us to have these higher level conversations about our relationship with money and our future goals and stuff, and it's really awesome.
Yeah, no, that's actually an excellent point to bring up, man, because money and finance is not really a solo game, right? Especially if you have a spouse or you're in a relationship. It's something that can be awkward to talk about, but people have different styles, right? And so I had a mind when me and Mira finally moved in together, I had this one mindset of how we need to budget and invest, and she had this completely different idea. And we weren't necessarily seeing eye to eye or reaching our goals. But once we started to say, hey, what works for you? What works for me? How can we dumb it down so that we can be more goal oriented? That's kind of what worked. And we had to remind ourselves that we're both goal oriented. So let's focus on goals rather than looking at what do we need to sacrifice, what do we need to cut down, and start building towards a goal. So I think, yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah. And this reminds me, he also spent a lot of time talking about for when he has clients, he's always trying to figure out with them, like, what's your why, right?
Mm-hmm.
If tomorrow you got all this money and Bill Gates basically left you all this money and whoever, insert rich person, and what would you do? Would you still work? Would you cut to part-time? With all that kind of stuff? So it's really, really important to start off with, like, why are you doing what you're doing? And, what are your goals? Kind of like, having that money date. And if for those of you who don't know what that means, and check out, he's got a couple of episodes talking about having a money date with your spouse. And it's fun. I highly recommend that.
Nice. Awesome. Anything else, or should we shift gears here?
Let's talk about what Ni-Cheng said, man. I think it's going to kind of tie in well, especially when we're talking about mental health. I thought that this was a really powerful episode. I mean, we talked about a lot of deep things. And somebody that I've been looking forward to speaking for a while. I mean, obviously, it's a topic that we could have gone down different avenues. But what were your initial impressions? What did you learn?
Yeah, I think, the reason I love this episode was that a lot of science was brought into it. And I think a lot of podcasts or YouTube videos or things that I just hear about meditation, mindfulness, you don't really get the science behind it. And that's why I think a lot of people aren't willing to stick with it, right? Because that why, right? A lot of people want the mechanisms. They want to understand why meditation helps them. They need to understand that just doing a 5-minute session once a week isn't really going to do anything for you, right? And in terms of a physiological response. So, Ni-Cheng coming in and talking about how, meditation helps from a parasympathetic versus sympathetic point of view, right? The rest and digest kind of takes over. The sympathetic is what causes us to stress out. And we've talked about this in multiple episodes, but that's really the backbone of mindfulness and meditation, is that it allows your autonomic nervous system to kind of tap into that parasympathetic system to really just relax you and help you out. And a lot of changes happen in your body.
I couldn't agree more, man. And you know what's funny about this, I think, well, for one, people use the terms, right, mindfulness and meditation interchangeably. And I really liked the absolute simple definition that used that, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but she talked about how, mindfulness is just being present, being in the present moment without judgment. If we think about it, especially today, even 10 years ago, it wasn't as challenging, where so many different things are fighting for our attention, whether it's what you did 5 minutes ago, what you're going to do 30 minutes from now, your phone, your spouse, you know what I mean? If you have kids, that. And it's really, really hard to be right there with your thoughts without judgment. Hey, I'm not doing anything productive. I think that we, folks like us who are extremely type A in the medical field, it's always boards are coming up, or this, or the patient and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's very, very challenging. And I like this analogy that she used. She said, meditation is the vehicle that you can build mindfulness with. It's like, I love my exercise analogy. So she kind of, related it to, it's like exercising to build strength or aerobic capacity. So, you can train to be more mindful, and meditation is just a tool to do that. And you and I have oftentimes talked about so many different ways. You definitely have a great routine. So I'll let you kind of talk about what seems to work for you. And I'm actually curious to, I don't know if I know this. Like, when did you first start doing this? Like, you were like, you know what, I need to do this. And how long did it take you before it was a staple where it was routine for you?
Yeah. A lot of people ask me that. So when I was younger, I've always been fascinated by like just the spiritual side of things, right? Like astronomy, horoscopes, like understanding how things were connected, right? Like how nature connects to us, magnetic fields, quantum, if I can say. That kind of stuff always just interested me. And so I remember being in college. This is before medical school. And this is when meditation kind of just started growing, and people were talking about it. And California started popping up with classes and things. I say, this is something I want to get into. I started looking into different YouTube videos of yogis and yoga. And yoga was one of the biggest things that helped me when I had a L5S1 herniation in my back, doing a lot of yoga asana and stretching. So I really wanted to get into breath work and changing physiology, and that's what I was super interested in. So I found a free class in my hometown that did Sahaja yoga. So essentially, it's Kundalini yoga. You kind of activate your chakras, the 7 chakras, midline of your body, looking at like the third eye, opening up some things, but just feeling very relaxed. And so, I definitely went to a lot of classes, doing hour meditations, and just getting that sense of feeling, right? And a lot of times when you do these meditations, you'll start to see some colors, you'll start to, right? Like there's noticeable changes that happen. And, obviously the yogis and stuff attribute that to, oh, that's like the spirit, or this is the energy and things like that. I just think we don't spend an hour quiet with our eyes closed being present. And if everyone does that, you'll probably notice like things happen, right? Like physiologically things just happen. And that's when I just really, really found it fascinating. And that's how I got into breath work and cold showers, and then really started to look into the science of it. So that's honestly how I got started. And now, I got to admit, I haven't been the most consistent since intern year. But now that, and it sucks, right? So this is what's funny. Now that I'm more free, I'm able to do it, right? Which shouldn't be the case, because I'm a huge proponent of someone who says, if you don't have the time to meditate once a day, you need to meditate twice a day.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. And so, I finally have found an app, and I'm very OCD in terms of data collection. So I used to do the whole Headspace and kind of check out my minutes, but now I'm at the point where I'll just use different vehicles, right? I'll use Spotify, and I'll use some binaural beats. I'll use nighttime meditation. I'll use nature music. I'll use guided meditation. I'll do breath work. So I like to just change it up and kind of just see, what relaxes me and how I can have fun with it.
For those who don't know really what you mean by breath work, can you just elaborate on that? Like, what do you mean exactly, breath work?
Sure. So, there's different forms of breath work. So I think most people will be familiar with the box method, which is you breathe in for a count of 4 seconds through your nasal passage, right? So you breathe in for 4 seconds, and then you might hold it there for 4 seconds. And then you're going to breathe out for longer. You're going to breathe out for 8 seconds. And what that does, again, is you kind of retain that carbon dioxide. And that's going to change your physiological state to put you more in terms of parasympathetics, which is going to relax you. And so if you do that, a lot of people say do it 3 cycles, you'll start to notice a difference. And now there's actually certain products that come out. I don't know if you've seen like the whistle, like people wear it as a necklace, and you just breathe out into like, it's almost like a straw. It's like a metal straw, but it forces you to exhale with pursed lips, and essentially pursed lip breathing, which I think Ni-Cheng talks about in the episode, is a good way to really just calm your body down.
Yeah. I think that's a key point. Actually, I remember, I think it was Andrew Huberman on Tim Ferriss' podcast, really talking about the whole relationship with inhale, exhale versus, sympathetic, parasympathetic. It's such a simple thing. Mm-hmm. And I want to go back to what you talked about, how you initially started with yoga. One of the issues, as Ni-Cheng had mentioned, is, people have this action bias, right? I got to do something, right? I got to do something in order to have an effect. Mm-hmm. It's not like inactivity is going to make you better. Like, that makes no sense, right? And so for a lot of individuals, finding stillness through movement is exactly what you're talking about. And that's not mine. I can't articulate that well. I definitely stole that from, I think it's George Mumford actually who talked about that. But and actually Ryan Holiday in the next book that you're going to read is you'll read about that. But that's there, right? I mean, so for a lot of individuals, it's much easier to get into mindfulness and the practice of meditation through yoga. And so for some individuals, it's through lifting weights. For others, it's running. How many times, just had an individual today who told me he used to run miles, and I was like, oh, did you ever run for a track or cross country? No, he was like, no, it just pointed to his head. He was like, for this right here. Yeah. And so, you get that runner's high. And I think that at a very basic level, people get that concept, but they're like, they need that because they feel that much better. And there's some meditative process about, this recurrent activity, focusing on your breath. So, I really like, there's a million different ways to do it. I think ultimately what it comes out is different ways work for different people, and you want to start somewhere. And ideally you can get to a point where you can just be there sitting still. Right. And I think people, again, it comes back to finding your why. I think people need to understand why they're meditating. Are they doing it because they actually need to, chill out? Are they doing it because they need better sleep? Hmm.
I was doing it at some point because I just wanted to see how long I could test myself for. I love
Hmm.
embracing the suck. It's that Goggins mentality. I remember I drove down from Philly all the way to North Carolina, 7-hour drive with no music, no podcast, nothing. Just driving 7 hours
Oh my
straight
God.
because I wanted to test myself and see if I could do it. And then I did it, right? And I was like, okay, I can go 7 hours of silence, no phone call, nothing, just me. I can definitely do 5-10 minutes, right? So for me, I love pushing my limits in that way. It's just kind of the weird way of how I get motivated. But I think people need to find that why and to see, what is the purpose of it? Because like there's so many different ways of doing it, and you're gonna find that one way that suits you.
Did you respond to any messages or WhatsApp or nothing like that? So
Nothing,
no notifications, no social media, nothing. That's
nothing.
quite impressive. That's so impressive because I'm just on autopilot sometimes where I'll just reach for my phone and I'll flip over my email.
Yeah,
That's what chief life does to you.
yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I mean, so this one, I mean, I think that I'm a huge fan of, I know I feel like it's just redundant. All these topics that we talk about are very interesting, but this one is a powerful one for me personally, man. I mean, full disclosure, this is the one that I struggle with the most. I find it challenging. There was a period, maybe toward the end of 2019, where I had a 6 month stint of where I was really focused, and a lot of times, it sounds kind of wild, but I would describe people as like, when you get to a point where your mindfulness, it's almost like watching a movie, or for those people who played video games, right? If you played Halo or you played some shooter games, you know what it's like to play a first person shooter game versus a third person shooter game, right?
Mhm.
Or the other analogy is, it's like you're watching a play versus you're in the play, right? And
Mhm.
so like if you're watching a play, you can observe everything that's going around it and all the actions of all the parties involved, versus that if you're in the play, you only have the perspective of one person. And so when you I don't know if that I'm making any sense whatsoever. People might say this guy's absolutely wild. But I attribute, the practice of mindfulness, when you get to a practice, is it's much more of you're sitting in the audience looking at, and you can see the whole picture.
Right.
And reactivity is much less. That pause between action and reaction. She talked about that with her personal story when she had a patient. I mean, I think that's such a powerful thing, such a powerful skill for us to develop, that would honestly make the world a better place.
Absolutely. I think you're so right, right? When you start to meditate and you start to understand the gaps between your thoughts, and when
Mm,
you translate that to real life, and somebody attacks you, right, with verbally or whatever it might be, or something bothers you, you take those 10 seconds and just think about it, right? As you would if you're meditating. And that's the key, right? I think a lot of people think meditation is not thinking. You can be in the present moment and think, right? Like I think thinking is meditation. Like a lot of my meditation is just me and my thoughts. And it's like emails, right? Naval Ravikant says it so well. Meditation is like going through your inbox. You delete, you delete, you delete. Oh, three come in. Okay, it's okay. You delete, you delete, you delete. Eventually, you're going to get to an inbox of zero, but it takes time. You just have to sit with your thoughts.
yeah. Let me ask you this. I know that, a lot of, for people, sometimes they'll start on this practice, right? And they have difficulty to slow down their thoughts because they're just coming from a revved up job, or they're about to do
Mhm.
something, or they had other adversity in life that they're thinking about. And I find that people tend to get frustrated, and I used to be in this camp as well. They get frustrated with, oh man, I can't turn those thoughts off. It's
Yeah.
contrary to exactly what you're saying right now. And there's one strategy that she talked about, but what is your strategy when you do have that, without judgment, saying, hey,
Right.
it's okay. This is not a failed practice, right? Because I can't turn the volume on these thoughts down.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you have any other strategies?
Yeah. So my strategy is how do I take these thoughts and turn them into tweets, right? How do I
Mm,
turn them into like advice and lessons for other people, right? Like what I think about what is my philosophy in life? Why are these thoughts coming up? What can I take away from this that I could write in my own biography? Because there's a reason I'm thinking this. There's something subconscious that's making me think of this, and I need to know what that is. And so I sit and it sits on replay and replay, and then oh, there's an offshoot. There's another thought. How is this related to this? And honestly, I'm at the point in my life now where I can just be doing anything. I'm just thinking about random things and seeing how everything's interconnected. And that can be a blessing for some people, and it could be also the worst nightmare. For me, it's honestly a lot of my tweets and stuff on Instagram and stuff come from that.
So will you pause and then write some of this stuff down, and
Yeah.
like as you're sitting there? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In my notes, I'll kind of have a lot of this stuff. It's also been awesome why I read a lot. I can make those connections as to why the author, oh, this, Ryan Holiday wrote this. This is kind of what I was thinking about. Oh, that's a coincidence. Like,
Yeah.
so I'm always trying to tap into the subconscious of thought. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong with meditation, is that they think your subconscious shouldn't hold anything. And I think it's important to understand yourself. I think meditation, the word itself, comes all from reflection, right? Looking at a mirror and dusting the dust off the mirror to clearly see yourself. And so I think people just need to understand that you're just getting a deeper version of yourself. You're getting clear vision of who you are.
That's beautifully said, man. And the other thing I think that, I know that you do, or at least did at some point, is journaling, right? And that's a version of it. So talk a little bit about how, are you doing both still, or just one or the other?
Journaling I need to get back into. So I just read Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Light.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. And it's his book is essentially a journal. It's since he's been journaling ever since he was little. And you really see his thought process. You see how he developed as an adult and as just a human being, and how he looks back at his life. And because these journals literally expose who he was at a deeper level. And I keep telling myself I need to go back and I need to start doing that. Again, the problem is, I'm tired. It takes a lot of time, but I'm getting to the point where I just jot down notes now. I literally just jot down thoughts. This. That's it. I'm not going in and writing paragraphs, but I am making sure I'm constantly thinking. And again, that's the reason why I tweet a good amount now. Is that's almost like my journal, right? It's the same reason why I get tattoos. It's a brand. It's a branding at the present moment of who you were in that moment. And you look back 10 years from now and you're like, oh, wow, that's who I was at 29, so.
Yeah. I like that. It's document the journey, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, hopefully people will be able to take away, be inspired to at least start some type of practice, whether it's yoga, whether it's just being more mindful of their actions, whether it's being inactive in some instances. And I think that, Ni-Cheng mentioned that in her patient encounters that are sometimes 20 minutes, she'll invite them to join her in a 1 minute breathing thing. And what's interesting about it is, we have a good amount of literature supporting that as little as 1 to 3 minutes a day. And it's just, you talk about 3 breaths, right? I mean, how long does that take if you're doing 4-8? Absolutely. That's 36 seconds right there, right? I would call that a win. If somebody's not starting, can you take 30 seconds out of your day, just focus on your breath? Now I wear an Apple Watch or something cool. It'll remind me. Yeah, it'll remind me, focus on your breath. And it's a 60-second thing. And just pause as long as you're not in traffic. I don't recommend that.
Google's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
Yeah, I was going to say, this was in Tim Ferriss's book, Tools of Titans. I forget if some guy at Google, maybe like chief happiness officer or something, he came out with just, it's 1 breath a day. That's all he says. He says, take 1 deep breath a day, whatever it is in the day, just 1. And he's like, that is a habit in itself, and you'll start to build on that, right? So
yep,
that's all it is.
Awesome. I love it. All right, man, let's shift gears and let's talk about light. We're these topics for people to grasp are probably getting more and more challenging, but it's funny because something that the way that Roudy Nassif explained it, it was like, wow, this is such a fascinating thing. This can't possibly be true, but it's like thousands of years. It's available to everybody. There's an abundance of it, and we neglect it to a certain degree where it's becoming a serious problem. And that's why it's such a hot topic now, right? You'll see article every single day about, blue light's this and more softwares and that kind of stuff. So, give us your initial thoughts. I know you've known him for a long time and you guys have been friends. So
where do I even go with this, man? Light is just such an interesting thing. It's mind boggling, right? It's one of those mind efforts when you think about it, because we can think about it in terms of our podcast, right? In terms of our own health, but you can also think about it in terms of just like light determines the past, present, and future, right? Like if you guys ever watch like Neil deGrasse Tyson's like documentaries, and if you're traveling towards light or away from light, it changes your whole perspective in terms of what the present moment actually is. It's absolutely mind boggling. But to keep it in terms of health, yeah, this is something I actually love in this episode, because blue blocking glasses have been something that I've been wearing now for about 2 years. And I'm really glad to have aligned with Viva Rays, Roudy's company, because through my Whoop data, the number one factor in terms of giving me better sleep and better resting heart rate and all those factors is wearing blue light blocking glasses. And that was actually very surprising to me. I really didn't think so. I thought it would be, not eating late or meditation, or just sleeping in the same bed every day and having that the cycle that I usually have, or the routine that I usually have. But no, it's been blue light blocking glasses.
I love that. And you know what I personally enjoyed a lot was him kind of breaking down the science for us, giving us the mechanistic explanations. Right? We all know that sunlight to a certain degree is good for us, and we know that blue light isn't not so good, and artificial light, obviously it's unavoidable in today's day and age. Literally every single thing that we do, and it's a must. But we have been over the years getting, obviously there's less natural light, more artificial light, and we're getting it inopportune times, right? I mean, here we are at 9:30 at night, and you got your glasses on. I don't, but I really enjoyed the explanations, because he, I think, mentioned that he learned from Dr. Wallace that that light helps us have control over our genetic expression, right? If you remember, we go back to Dr. B, who talked about the microbiome is sitting at the switchboard, right? We all have these genes, and this is the whole concept of epigenetics, that our environmental factors influence which genes get turned on and which ones don't. And Dr. B had mentioned that the microbiome is sitting at the switchboard, flipping them on. And Roudy's arguing that light is another one of them. It's another controller. We have millions of reactions happening in our body, right? And his analogy of light being kind of the spark, right? If we go back, it's funny, we go back to this car analogy. It just seems to work all the time. And if food is the quote unquote fuel, some people hate that. But he had talked about light as kind of the spark for the ignition, right? That's going to kickstart a lot of these mechanisms, and they're going to have a cascade of both positive and negative effects depending on what type of light you're getting. I personally found that to be really interesting. It's not something that I've ever learned about in my life before, so I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the basis of life, right, and our evolution with light, right? It's such an important factor for how we became the species that we are today, right? Even learning to start fire and building fire and using fire as a tool. And what's interesting is fires, you can look at fire without having blue light blocking glasses, but it won't affect you the same way as light would, right? So there's a difference in sunrise, sunset, the sun at high noon, and then versus the sun after sunset or whatever. I mean, after sunset it's gone, but but to kind of just prove a point there is to say that the sun affects you differently. Like light has different wavelengths, and these colors affect us differently. And this is an emerging topic, right? Dr. Andrew Huberman talks about this now as well, because it's just such a big topic that we're learning more and more about, right? Quantum biology is becoming a thing. Hopefully in the future we can get people to talk about water and even how hydration works at a quantum level in our body. But it's such a fascinating thing.
Yeah, I was just talking to my buddy right now. Actually, I think Dr. Huberman was on Tim Ferriss's podcast recently, maybe a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about the interplay between the vestibular system and vision and light. And I thought that was a really interesting one too. That I don't know. Did you get a chance to listen to that one yet?
I haven't. No.
Yeah, and there's some actionable tips that I'll bring up towards the end. One of the things that I've started doing on my daily, my day-to-day routine, that we'll see what kind of effects that it has. But let's bring it back down to the concept of sleep, right? Because you and I forget what we're talking about before the mic was on or not. Is for you got interested in it because sleep. You mentioned your Whoop data. You saw a positive response there, and I think most people have heard of the concept of circadian rhythms, right? And so, for those who haven't, what is that? Our body. People will argue, is on a 24-hour clock. Some people will say it's actually, I think Matthew Walker will say it's a little bit more than 24 hours.
Yeah.
I don't really know. I don't care. I think it's close enough.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, if for people who are familiar with Dr. Sachin Panda's work, he talks about how every single organ in our body has circadian rhythm. Your liver, your heart, your muscles, every single thing. And so a lot of these metabolic reactions, these chemical reactions, they are going to be controlled at a hormonal level by the hypothalamus and by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, right? And that's kind of sitting up in your brain. And Roudy talked about that eloquently, so I won't repeat it. And it's, the analogy that he gave is kind of the conductor for the symphony. And so what is it triggered by? It's triggered by light. So this goes back to that concept of, when we first get up in the morning, it is super important. And this is one of the things that Dr. Huberman recently mentioned is there are a few things that can kind of kickstart our circadian rhythm, tell our body, hey, this is the starting point. This is T0, right? And one of them is movement, exercise, right? So you get up, you get moving, 5-minute flow. Mm-hmm. One thing coming future, a little teaser for people. Another one is food, right? Kickstart the circadian rhythm, your body starts digesting. Like, okay, it's time to eat. It's time to move around. And third one is light, right? That early sunrise exposure in those melanopsin cells that are going to transmit signals to the brain that, hey, it's time to get up. Let's reset everything to 0.0. And, that's when, you're going to have that T0, and then 16 hours or so, that's when the melatonin is going to start increasing. And almost every single person's heard of melatonin and what it does. So, I think that is such an important topic for people to understand, is that your best night's sleep starts from the moment that you wake up. It doesn't, people are like, oh, you know what? It's 10 o'clock. I want to get to bed by 11 or whatever. So I need to start winding down at 9:30. No, you need to get things dialed at like 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Right. Or probably some people would argue the night before, because that's going to determine the quality. Right. And so I know some people might listen to this and be like, man, that sounds ridiculous. Like, how am I, my whole day is going to be planned around that. And it just keeps coming back to, if you remember, because this one stuck with me, is every single one of these people in these 3 interviews that we talked about, the one common thing is they all talked about behavioral changes. Ryan talked about behavior, relationship with money. Ni-Cheng talked about implementing a daily practice, having an intention, and what we're doing it for. And then when we asked to Roudy, how to add health and healthcare, he talked about light and everything that he's passionate about. He's created a whole company around, but it's about the behavioral changes, right? Kind of looking at the holistic approach. And it's almost comical to me that it's so basic, but that's just what works, man.
Yeah, it is. And I think, again, it's a fascinating episode for people. And again, we talk about the basics, right? We don't go very heavy into the science in this episode. I mean, maybe we can bring him back, or we'll again get some more sleep experts to kind of talk about melatonin and sleep medication and really delve into those phases. But this was just a great overview on light and how we can interact with light and how we can use light to our advantage, and why can light be bad for us sometimes, right? It's not this all good or all bad thing. We just have to know how to interact with it. And, Roudy himself had this personal journey of being depressed and not in a good mood, and, growing up with ADHD and just being in a rut, and finally figuring out, as he started to learn about biology and quantum physics and being an engineer, he started to learn how much light impacted his daily life. And he kind of got out of that. And now, he's here starting this company, trying to impact others in a positive way.
Yeah. And last thing I'll mention is, because this was something really fascinating, speaking on the science, and anecdotally, a lot of people will talk about, when they get up, they feel better, right? And we've got a whole disorder called seasonal affective disorder, right? And for those who don't know, you can quickly Google it. And we have light therapy. We've got red light therapy. People have even get blue light therapy. We give light therapy to children, right? Depending on, and for obviously under supervision. But so he explained some of the mechanisms behind it. He talked about how sunlight provides the energy through the eyes. Like, for instance, tryptophan is a precursor for serotonin. Serotonin is your feel happy hormone, right? And that could be a possible explanation for why you feel good when you see sunlight, right? And it's not just, I would argue there are some associations with sun equals summer break, so that's kind of conditioned to us. But I think that there's something even more innate than that. Another one, he talked about tyrosine, and how tyrosine is a precursor for dopamine. Dopamine is the go, right? So if you get that more of a dopamine response, you are going to be more active. So, hey, if you want to try to get that workout in the morning, how do we make this actionable? Get a little bit of sunlight, increase that dopamine response, you will be more inclined to want to do something, right? That's what dopamine is. And Dr. Huberman talks about this as well. Dopamine is less of I think people think, because they associate, and when talk about drugs, we associate cocaine with dopamine, right? And I think it makes you feel good. Yeah, it does that, but its primary function is to motivate you, right? I think he even talks about some of the beta endorphins, right? So it's that quick hit of sunlight. So pretty much across the board, sunlight's causing a positive response for, I think, almost everybody. Well, I think unless you're a vampire, you're going to have a positive response. So, so I thought that was pretty cool as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just highly recommend all the listeners to check out the Viva Ray's website. Not only to just shop, but even to just subscribe to their email list. They're sending out some pretty good content, some out of the box approaches, but everything related to light therapy. They just recently had one about sunscreen and kind of their thoughts on light in the skin and why we need to get out into the sun more and condition our skin actually so that it doesn't get burned so easily. And they're bringing up data and different things like that too. So just a lot of out of the box approaches that will make you think and kind of change the way you interact with light.
Speaking of sunscreen, I was watching or not watching. I was on Dr. Berardi's page on Instagram. He posted some, I don't know if you saw that. So there's this like 14 or 15-year-old girl who had gone to Central America or South America, and she was surfing and found like a really cool sunscreen that wouldn't wash off when they're catching waves. And then when it came back to Florida or something, I forget where she was in the States, she wasn't able to find it. It was like all natural, organic, and environment friendly type stuff. And she basically made it. I thought that was really cool. Did you get a chance to see that?
No, I haven't.
It's on his page. There's a really cool story. And that has nothing to do with hair there. It just reminds me. I think that's a really cool story about sunscreen.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, whatever. It's cool. I'm trying to work on my skin routine anyways and stuff. So, man, things falling here.
I love it.
We're a mess. Cool.
All right, buddy. Well, this has been really good. Guys, again, can't recommend these enough. I think that, these aren't quote unquote the sexiest of topics. I think some aspects of them are. Obviously, people want to learn more about mindfulness, meditation, how to incorporate them in your practice. And I really encourage people to check out Ni-Cheng's episode because she gives you some actionable ways to do that and simplifies it. I think that it can be something that can be intimidating. I know for me personally, it has been. And I've been guilty of being judgmental against myself. And I think, if you listen to this episode, people will start appreciating that, hey, maybe we don't have to be that harsh to the person in the mirror. In terms of light, again, we talked a lot about blue light and stuff like that, junk light. And Roudy does a great job explaining the differences, the science behind it. And then lastly, Ryan, the money makes the world go round, man. So can't recommend that enough.
Absolutely. Yep. Cool. Well, all right, people, find your why out there, and behavior modification is the theme of this, I guess. So,
yes, sir. All right,
cool.
buddy.
All right, man. Have a great night. Peace.
You too.
Thank you so much for joining us in this Lessons Learned episode. This is something that Altamash and I really enjoy doing because we understand that it takes vulnerability in our health journey in order to make improvements. And this is a time where we can at least share the actionable steps that we are taking from what we learn from the guests, and also those things that we might not be the best at. And so I think it's just crucial that we all kind of accept that we have strengths and there are certain things that we need to work on, but in the end we can make incremental changes to become healthier. And before we go, let's give another shout out to our sponsor, CareCloud. Don't let bad billing processes keep you from your hard-earned revenue. CareCloud's free revenue cycle assessment uncovers billing mistakes so you can see how to claim every last dollar. Get your free assessment by visiting drpodcastnetwork.com/CareCloud. Again, that's drpodcastnetwork.com/CareCloud. Don't wait. CareCloud is ready to help your practice thrive. And here's the time for the quick disclaimer. Everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, and we are not providing medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician regarding any specific health-related issues. And until next time, please rate, review, share, and subscribe.